Word spread like wildfire. President Donald Trump was coming to their small farming town, scheduled to speak at the local fairgrounds about the future of American agriculture. Families dropped their chores, cleaned their barns, and dressed in their Sunday best. In Willow Creek, farming wasn't just a job. It was identity, tradition, survival. Among the growing crowd was 19-year-old Clara Dawson, daughter of Henry Dawson, a corn farmer barely holding on to land that had been in their family for generations. Her mother had passed 3 years earlier, and since then, Clara had become her father's quiet strength, even as debts climbed higher than harvest. That morning, as they made their way to the fairgrounds, Clara noticed her father's hand trembling on his cane. He tried to smile, but she could see it. The weight of worry written deep in the creases of his weathered face. Today wasn't just about seeing the president. For them, it was about hope, a chance to be heard. The fairgrounds buzzed with anticipation. Children waved flags. Old farmers tipped their hats. Clara stood toward the back, heart pounding for reasons she couldn't quite explain. Then came the motorcade. The crowd roared as President Trump stepped onto the stage, the American flag flapping proudly behind him. For a moment, tiny Willow Creek felt like the center of the world. Trump began his speech with the energy he was known for, talk of trade deals, protecting American farmers, and restoring the dignity of rural work. The crowd clapped, cheered, nodded, but Clara wasn't clapping. She was thinking of her father's sleepless nights, the stack of unpaid bills on their kitchen table, the way he stood silently in the fields last week, as if saying goodbye to the only life he'd ever known. The president's promises rang bold, but to Clara, they felt far away. She leaned closer to her father. His face was still, but the worry in his eyes was louder than the applause around them. And then, Trump paused to take a sip of water. The noise quieted. The silence between words was thick. Clara's heart thundered. A voice inside her whispered, "This is your moment." She turned to her father. "Daddy," she said softly, "I think I have to ask him something." Henry's eyes widened. "Clara, no, this isn't the time." But her hands were already shaking, not with fear, but with courage. If not here, then where? If not now, then when? Before he could stop her, Clara stepped forward. Then another, until she broke from the crowd, raised her voice, and called out, "Mr. President." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads turned. Security shifted. On stage, Trump paused mid-sentence, squinting toward the sound. "Yes, young lady?" he asked, voice firm but curious. Clara swallowed. Her throat was tight. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "Don't ever let them forget who we are." "I'm Clara Dawson," she said, voice trembling. "My father has worked our land for over 40 years, and we're about to lose it. We can't keep up with the costs. Everyone says farmers are the backbone of America, but most days we feel invisible. Do you really see us?" A stunned silence followed. Then murmurs. Some nodded. Others frowned, unsure what to make of her boldness. Clara didn't back down. "You talk about saving farms," she said, eyes fixed on the president. "But when my dad looks at the bills, he doesn't see protection. He sees failure. What would you tell him? What would you tell me?" Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice held. For the first time during his speech, Trump stepped back from the podium. The bravado softened from his face. "What's your name?" he asked again. "Clara Dawson." And just like that, she wasn't just Henry Dawson's daughter anymore. She was the voice of every farmer's child who had ever felt forgotten. Trump nodded slowly, then motioned for her to come forward. The Secret Service hesitated, but he waved them aside. The crowd parted like water, and Clara walked through, steady, brave, unshaken. Behind her, her father stood frozen, his heart torn between fear and pride. When she reached the edge of the platform, President Trump extended a hand to help her up. His expression held no anger, only curiosity. "Clara," he said softly, repeating her name as if committing it to memory. "Your question matters, and it took us to ask it." Clara clutched the microphone. Her hands trembled, but she found her voice. "I just want my father to keep our farm," she said, eyes flicking toward the crowd. I want kids like me to believe we still have a future here. But every day, it feels like the ground under us is slipping away. The fairgrounds had fallen silent. Farmers stood shoulder to shoulder, listening, waiting. Some nodded solemnly, others blinked away tears. Clara looked back at the president. So I'll ask again, sir, do you really see us? For once, Trump didn't respond with statistics or campaign slogans. He looked at Clara, then at Henry, still standing among the crowd, eyes locked on his daughter. I see you, he said finally, and maybe I haven't listened closely enough before today. But now, you made sure I do. Applause rippled through the crowd, slow at first, then rising like a wave. Clara didn't know what would happen next, but she knew something had shifted. She wasn't invisible anymore. The mood was electric, but divided. Some cheered Clara's courage. Others whispered nervously, worried about her boldness in confronting the president. Henry's heart pounded in his chest. Was this bravery or a mistake? Trump leaned on the podium, studying her. You spoke from the heart, he said, and that takes courage. Reminds me, sometimes the quietest voices are the most important. The ones out there working every day, never asking for credit. They're the ones who deserve to be heard. The crowd erupted again, this time with deeper conviction. Clara's cheeks flushed, not with shame, but with something unfamiliar, strength. Then she saw it, tears in her father's eyes. She hadn't seen that since her mother's funeral. Trump turned to her again. Clara, tell me about your farm. Her voice cracked, but she spoke clearly. We grow corn. My dad wakes up before the sun and works until long after it's gone. He's kept this land alive for decades, but the debt keeps growing, no matter how hard he works. I'm afraid one day there won't be anything left for me. A heavy silence followed. Not awkward, just honest. Every farmer in that crowd understood. From the back, Henry Dawson stood motionless, his knuckles white around his cane, his heart breaking. He had spent his life shielding Clara from this burden, and now she stood on a stage, caring for the world to see. Trump pointed toward the crowd. Is that your father? Clara nodded. Yes, sir. Security moved to guide Henry toward the stage. He hesitated. Every step felt like a lifetime. But when he finally joined Clara, his shoulders slumped from years of labor. Yet his eyes held a quiet, unwavering pride. Trump reached out. Mr. Dawson, your daughter is remarkable. Henry's voice was low, worn by time. She's braver than I ever was. He turned to Clara, his voice trembling. I never wanted you to carry this weight, sweetheart. Clara gripped his arm. Daddy, we carry together. Something broke inside Henry then, a wall he had held up for decades. For the first time, he allowed himself to be seen, not just as a farmer, but as a man afraid of losing everything he loved. Trump placed a hand on his shoulder. Let's make sure this story doesn't end in loss. The president turned to face the crowd. A sea of worn hands, tired faces, and hopeful hearts. I came here to talk about policy, he said. But Clara reminded me, this isn't about numbers. It's about people, families, generations of work and sacrifice. The applause came again, louder now, rising like thunder. Clara's heart pounded. Her voice, her truth, had turned a speech into a moment of reckoning. Trump continued, if farms like the Dawsons fail, America fails. So here's my pledge. I will bring your voices to Washington. Loudly and clearly. No farmer should feel invisible again. Clara looked at her father. For the first time in years, his expression softened. Not with weariness, but with hope. The crowd chanted her name. Hats waved in the air. Flags fluttered like prayers. Clara leaned toward her father. Do you think he'll keep his word? Henry paused, his eyes glassy. I don't know, Clara, but you made him promise. That's more than I ever thought possible. 2 days later, the phone rang in the Dawson farmhouse. Henry didn't answer. He rarely did. Too many calls from collectors. This time, Clara picked up. Hello. This is the office of the president. May I speak with Clara Dawson? She froze. This is Clara. The president would like to invite you and your father to Washington. He believes your story should be heard by the nation. She nearly dropped the phone. Daddy, she said, turning to him, they want us in Washington. Henry's coffee mug hit the table with a clatter. Washington? Us? We're just farmers. Clara smiled gently. Not anymore. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Neighbors stopped by to congratulate them. Reporters called constantly. Even the mayor shook Henry's hand in the grocery store. For the first time, Willow Creek didn't feel forgotten. But Clara didn't let it get to her head. This wasn't about fame. It was about saving their farm, and every farm like it. The Dawsons boarded a plane for the first time in their lives. Clara pressed her face to the window as the Iowa fields disappeared beneath the clouds. Henry clung to the armrest beside her. Never thought I'd leave my farm for this, he muttered. When they arrived in Washington, the towering buildings and endless traffic overwhelmed them. Flashbulbs sparked from all directions. Clara gripped her father's hand like a lifeline. At their hotel, she stood by the window, staring at the Capitol dome glowing in the distance. Daddy, do you realize where we are? This is where futures are decided. Henry nodded slowly. And we're just two people, hoping not to lose a farm. The next morning, they were escorted to the White House. As they stepped into its grand halls, Clara's breath caught. Portraits of presidents lined the walls like silent witnesses. Her boots felt heavy on the polished floors. When President Trump entered the room, Henry instinctively removed his cap. Clara stood tall. Clara, Trump said, shaking her hand, you reminded me of something important that day. Now, I want the country to hear you, too. She was invited to speak at a press conference. The room buzzed with cameras, reporters, and national press. Clara stood before the microphone, palms sweating. Trump introduced her. This young woman, Clara Dawson, didn't just speak for her father. She spoke for millions, for every farmer working hard and feeling forgotten. The microphone turned toward her. Clara took a breath. My father has worked the same land for 40 years. He doesn't ask for much, just a chance to keep going. We're not looking for handouts. We're asking to be seen, to have a voice. Her voice steadied. If farms disappear, so does the food on your table. So does our history. And so does hope. Reporters scribbled notes. Cameras clicked. And at the back of the room, Henry stood quietly, tears in his eyes, chest full of pride. When Clara finished, the room erupted in applause. It wasn't the usual political applause. It was something raw, honest, moved. As the final echo of clapping faded across the fairgrounds, Clara Dawson realized she wasn't just a farmer's daughter anymore. She was a voice for her father, for Willow Creek, for thousands, maybe millions, who had never dared to speak. President Trump leaned in, just enough for her to hear. You just changed the conversation. Clara's heart pounded. This moment was bigger than her, bigger than their farm, and it had only just begun. But attention came with a price. Not everyone saw Clara as a hero. The media buzzed with headlines, some praising her courage, others calling her naive. The president's puppet, 17 and over her head. Just another teenager chasing the spotlight. Back at the hotel, Clara scrolled through the comments, each word carving deeper into her doubt. She knows nothing about policy. Nice performance. Farm girl. Her chest tightened. The phone slipped from her hands. Silence. Henry, sitting by the window with his coffee, watched her carefully. Don't let their noise drown out the truth, Clara, he said softly. You spoke from your heart. That's something they can't take from you. But she whispered, what if I raise hopes I can't keep? What if I made a fool of us? Henry reached for her hand. His fingers were rough, callous from decades of labor, but they trembled. You gave us hope, Clara. Even if nothing changes, you reminded folks like us that we still matter. And that, he paused, his voice thick, that's no small thing. That night, a package arrived at the hotel. Inside, a letter, handwritten in shaky cursive. Dear Clara, I watched you on the news. My husband worked our land until the day he died. You reminded me that people like us still matter. Thank you. You gave me hope. Mrs. Henderson, Willow Creek. Clara pressed a letter to her chest, her tears spilling freely now. This wasn't just about saving one farm. It was about dignity, legacy, the quiet lives so easily overlooked. She showed the letter to her father. Henry read it slowly, then looked at her, eyes misted, but shining. You're carrying more than just our story now, he said. You're carrying theirs, too. And for the first time, Clara didn't feel afraid. The next morning, Clara and Henry were invited to a policy meeting. Inside a marble conference room, officials in expensive suits toss around words like subsidies, tariffs, and efficiency quotas. Clara listened, overwhelmed, until one man casually dismissed small farms as less efficient. That did it. She leaned forward. "Excuse me." The room paused. "Less efficient?" she said, her voice sharp. "My father wakes up at 4 a.m. He works 12-hour days, not for profit, for survival. That's not an efficiency. That's sacrifice." Silence. Then a smirk from Trump. "That's exactly why she's here," he said. "To remind us, behind every number is a name, a story, a family." Henry's back straightened. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel invisible in a room like this. That evening, Clara and Henry were invited to a formal White House dinner. The chandeliers glowed like stars. The silverware shimmered. And Henry Dawson stood awkwardly in an old, borrowed suit. He whispered, "Clara, I don't belong here." She smiled, squeezing his hand. "Daddy, this is exactly where you belong." During dinner, Trump raised his glass. To the farmers, the backbone of this country, and to Clara Dawson, who reminded us why they matter. The room clapped politely, but Henry's eyes didn't just hold pride. They held vindication. For years, he'd felt forgotten. That night, he was honored at the nation's table. Later, Clara stood alone on a White House balcony, looking over the glowing city. "Mom," she whispered to the stars, "I hope you see this. I hope you're proud." Henry joined her, placing an arm around her shoulders. "She's with us, Clara, always." And for the first time, Clara believed it. When they returned to Willow Creek, it was as if the whole town had been waiting. Neighbors greeted them with pies, hugs, and tears. Children gathered around Clara asking, what was the White House like? But as the excitement faded, reality returned. The bills still came. The bank still called. The farm was still on the brink. Clara sat on the porch, staring out over the golden fields. "Daddy, what if nothing really changes?" Henry joined her, resting beside her in silence. "Change doesn't happen in a day," he said. "But you planted a seed, Clara. Give it time. Farmers know that better than anyone." She smiled faintly. Of course. Patience was part of the harvest. Weeks later, it happened. A headline swept through the news. "New farm relief package inspired by Iowa teen speech." Clara gasped, reading the article aloud. Henry sat frozen, eyes wide. "They listened," he whispered. "They actually listened." The phone rang off the hook. Letters poured in from across the country. Farmers wrote with gratitude. Reporters requested interviews. Clara's name was everywhere, but she didn't care about the headlines. What mattered was the look on her father's face. Relief, gratitude, and for the first time in years, hope. That evening, the Dawson farmhouse filled with neighbors. Mr. Miller, a farmer on the verge of bankruptcy, shook Henry's hand. "Because of Clara, my son and I get to keep our farm." Mrs. Lopez hugged Clara tightly. "You gave us back our dignity." Clara blushed, unsure how to respond. "I just asked a question," she said quietly. Henry placed a hand on her shoulder. "No, Clara, you asked a question, and it changed everything." Months passed. The Dawson farm flourished again. The bills eased. The land gave more than it had in years. And through it all, Clara worked beside her father, planting, harvesting, believing. One evening, as the sun dipped low over golden fields, Henry looked at her. "You saved this farm, Clara." She shook her head. "No, Daddy, we saved it. I just found the words you never spoke." His eyes glistened. Your mother would be proud beyond words. Clara looked out across the land that had once felt like a burden. Now, it looked like a promise. Years later, Clara stood alone at the edge of those same fields. Her hands were rough now, her hair sun-kissed. The farm was hers. Henry had passed, but his lessons lived in every planted row, every breath of wind that rustled through the corn. She often told young farmers who came to her for guidance, "Never think your voice is too small. One question can change everything." Inside the farmhouse, a framed photograph hung on the wall. Clara standing beside President Trump at the fairgrounds. Not a political symbol, but a reminder of the moment she chose not to stay silent. And every time the wind whispered through the corn, she swore she could hear his voice. "I see you, Clara. I always did." Her question hadn't just saved a farm. It had given hope to a nation.